Hello everyone, it's PJ Thum here and welcome back to Singapore elections coverage talk show with me, PJ Thum, of New Narrative. I am here with The Online Citizen, where we'll be hosting this show and live streaming throughout the day, on and off throughout the day for the whole election period. So the whole point of this show is for you to ask questions. There's a lot of questions out there. I've been getting a lot of questions about the elections process and things like that. I've got a whole list of questions right here that have been sent in. So I'm going to answer some of them, but we're also on Facebook and on YouTube. So if you have any questions, go to the Facebook page and leave a question and I'd be happy to answer it. So I'm looking at it on my phone right here. And I'll be happy to answer whatever questions that you have. Yeah. Okay. So the first question that I have here, what is the general election process like? What will polling day be like? So pretty straightforward. This is a question. So some of these questions I actually got from the Instagram live yesterday with Trisha Young _makeup, who had me on her Instagram live yesterday. So what is the general election process like? Well, today we had nomination day, where you saw the various candidates nominated, and the successful ones, having gone through this process, are confirmed as running in the election campaigning period. During this period, the laws of Singapore actually change a little bit to accommodate the ability of politicians, candidates to campaign and run, but they don't change very much. And why they need to change at all, is another question. Candidates will be doing things like streaming from their website. They'll be talking to us directly on Facebook Live, YouTube Live. There'll be e-rallies. I think the SDP has one right now, I think. And then what happens on the 9th of July is that there is cooling off day. There is no election advertising on that day. But of course, if you've watched my video about the electoral process, the show of PJ Thum episode 2 and episode 3, you'll know that that is a day that is very unfair towards the opposition. Throughout this period, we will also have TV broadcasts. There will be 2 sets of party political broadcasts where the political parties will do videos. As a party, usually their leader will speak directly to camera, and that will happen on the 2nd of July and on the 9th of July from 7 o'clock. And time for those is apportioned according to the number of candidates you are running, with a minimum of 6 candidates. So the PAP with 93 candidates gets the most time, and then the parties which are running very few candidates will get the least time, which again is really unfair, because why does it matter how many candidates you're running? Why should a party really get less time? Let's just hear from all of them, right? Because they all are important and every party should be treated equally. If you want to impose a certain barrier, sure, but it ends up advantaging parties with more resources to field more candidates, which is kind of unfair to the smaller ones. Between the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, there will be constituency broadcasts, where again the individual politicians get 3 minutes each to speak on camera, and they'll be broadcast on TV. 3 minutes is, I don't even see what the point is, 3 minutes. If it's a GRC, then you get that collected amount of time for all the people. So if it's a 5-person GRC, you get 15 minutes and 1 person of the 5 gets to speak. So again, this advantages the parties with a lot of people. And then on the 10th of July, which is Friday, we will have polling day. You should go to the Elections Department website, eld.gov.sg, to see when your time slot is for voting. Because of COVID-19, in the past you could just show up and vote. Make sure you bring a polling card and either your IC or your passport. But now what ELD is doing is they've assigned time bands for all of us. So for example, my time band at my polling station is 4 to 6 p.m. So keep that in mind when you go and vote, so that we spread out and hopefully there won't be another new cluster of infections from a polling station. And then when polls close on polling day, there will be counting immediately afterwards. And because of the quick count, usually we'll know the results quite quickly. If I remember correctly, by say 10 o'clock or so, we should definitely have an idea of who's won in each constituency. Of course, right now we already know who's won the whole election. That's the People's Action Party, because let's face it, they're going to win the whole election whether we like it or not, because it's so unfair. Okay, so the next question, is my vote secret? And what does the serial number on the ballot track? Okay, and I can't emphasize this enough. Yes, your vote is totally secret. It is verifiably secret because there's an army of volunteers called polling agents out there making sure that your vote is secret. They oversee the polling, the voting process. They're there. They're representing all the various parties. Every party at a polling station that is represented, that is running in that constituency, gets to appoint a polling agent to be there at the polling station to watch the whole thing the whole day. I've been a polling agent before, and I can tell you that the process is very rigorous. We're there the whole day, we're watching. There is no question that the vote is secret. The only caveat is you must have a polling agent from every party there in order to be sure. So if you want the vote to be verifiably secret, if you want to be sure, go and volunteer. It doesn't matter which party. Volunteer for any party. It doesn't matter. You can volunteer for multiple parties, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, and then volunteer as a counting agent in the evening. But this is what is needed. It's the volunteers, it's us citizens who make sure that the vote is secret. Now, what is the serial number for? The serial number on your ballot is to prevent fraud. If the vote is contested, if the number of votes are contested, if people feel that that has been some sort of fraud, ballot box stuffing, right, after it's counted, you can, through a court order, have the boxes unsealed and then go through the ballots, and they can be rematched with the original counterfoil. It's like a checkbook, right? You rip off the ballot. So they can all be matched up so that you can verify that all the ballots are real. Now, there has never been a case of fraud. The ballots have never been opened up. The ballot boxes have never been opened up, and the ballots have never been checked. So throughout all our history, you can be sure that your vote is secret. And after 6 months, all the ballot boxes will be burned, incinerated, and that'll be that. No one will ever know how you voted. Okay, so you know for sure that the ballot is secret, your vote is secret. Don't worry about it, but if you want to do something, go volunteer as a polling agent or counting agent for any party. Okay, so let me see. Okay, there's a question here. Is this the first time that scripts have to be submitted for the broadcast? My understanding is no. In the past, because there were rallies, right, those scripts aren't submitted in advance. But for the broadcast, those scripts were submitted. And it's another way that the rules don't really make sense. I think there have been several reasons given. The scripts have to be vetted. Why they need to be vetted, I don't know. If a party wants to say something racist and torpedo their own chances of winning an election, then better they reveal themselves to be racist now rather than halfway through the term. Subtitles, I don't really understand why you need 48 hours or why you need to be it done so far in advance. And I think that in principle, it's good to have things which help people who maybe are less able, and so you have subtitles or you have a sign language interpreter. I would love to see all those things, but again, I'm not quite sure why you need to do it 48 hours in advance when political events change so rapidly. But to answer your question, yes, it has been a requirement in the past, but I think it's only a big issue now because because there's such a reliance on TV and, to get the word out because we don't have rallies. So it was never that big of an issue in the past. Will there still be a manual counting of the vote because they have counting machines? Okay, yes. The vote count is entirely manual. Right? And it is dependent on the counters to look at the ballot and decide that it is, how the person has voted, and it's ultimately the counting official, assistant returning officer, I believe they're called, to decide, to adjudicate if there's any dispute. The counting machines only count votes that have already been adjudicated and decided. So what they'll do is all the votes for Party A will go in this pile and all the votes for Party B will go in this pile. They'll use the machine to count those already sorted votes. So the machine does not count unsorted votes. Somebody will look at the ballot, decide who you voted for, put it in a pile, and then the machine counts those votes. Okay? So the machine has nothing to do with deciding how you have voted. It only counts sorted votes. And that's another reason why having counting agents from all the parties is really important to help make sure that the votes are being counted correctly, right? Because counting officials are only human, they can make mistakes. It's really important that counting agents are there. Okay, can you go through the whole process? It will be if the vote to review.
So they have to go through all the polls and whatnot. Like number one, after keying all the votes to review who voted or who can access this data,
right.
How much money to pay for the people to get these people to get the data.
I'm not quite sure what the question means.
So it is possible to backtrack the serial number to who voted for who by matching. But
yeah.
How impossible would that be?
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, okay. So yes, it would be a major effort to actually secretly unseal the ballot boxes. It would require a lot of different people. It would require people to count, and then it would require so much time, effort, and money. And let's be honest, the PAP have already rigged the system so much before you vote, right? We just heard from Connie, who is very much a political activist and aware in her own right, and she still felt fear when she went to vote. This was decades ago, of course, but it is far more effective for them to rig the vote beforehand. But here is my point, right? The PAP needs the vote to be secret. Their entire legitimacy for the next 5 years rests on the fact that they can say that Singaporeans freely voted for the PAP and they did not commit any fraud. So if it ever turns out that there is any fraud, that would utterly destroy the PAP's legitimacy, because it is the one thing that they have to say that they can do all their policies, steamroller through government, to parliament, right? Force all these stupid laws on our lives. All of that is legitimized by this one thing, that we freely put an X in the box. Okay? Of course, they ignore the fact the vote is very unfree and very unfair, but they need the vote to be legitimate in the sense of there is no fraud. So it is not in the PAP's interest to have any fraud, and it is not in the PAP's interest to ever have any hint that the vote is actually fraudulent. Now, when it comes to secrecy, of course, they have never come out and said the vote is secret, because it is their interest to cause fear, right? And they're happy for us to be afraid. Establishment parties, people in power, it benefits them for us to be ignorant and afraid. But just ask yourself, right? This is a government which has fumbled many of the most basic things that they're doing, and yet somehow we think that there can be a secret conspiracy. They couldn't even keep like COVID-19 arrangements secret. They kept having to prosecute people for breaking the Official Secrets Act, for spreading it on WhatsApp. Conspiracy theories are kind of dumb because they assume that a group of people can keep a secret when actually, honestly, you look, 2-3 people can't even keep a secret nowadays in this world. So really, honestly, your vote is secret. It's just, it makes no sense for it to be not secret. Okay? Okay, I can't see many of these questions. Let me just, okay. So, oops. How will I know if I have a choice in my GRC? How does a walkover work? And how can we show support for opposition parties if this happens? Okay, so this was asked yesterday, and now that we know today who's running in what GRC because of the nomination process, we know who's running. So if you are in a GRC where the party that you want to vote for or the people that you support aren't running, well, you're not limited to simply volunteering at that party. Parties need help all the time, right? If you look around you, there's banners, there's posters, and very often they're all PAP posters because the PAP has the funding and the manpower to put them up very quickly. So other parties need a lot of volunteer help. Or if you want to help Terry here because he desperately needs help, right? He can't afford to pay for help. So if you have a couple of hours, come down here and help Terry. Otherwise, it's just the two of us broadcasting from this room here, trying to give some balance to the media coverage and answer questions. It's not in the mainstream media's interest to answer the kind of questions we're answering here, right? So if you want a free and fairer election, at least freer and fairer media coverage, come and help Terry. Or go and volunteer with any political party anywhere. Volunteer with the one you like. You can live anywhere and volunteer with any political party. Okay, so let's see. Are you a swimmer? Yes, I was a swimmer. I swam for Singapore in the '96 Olympics, and I swam the English Channel in 2005. That's me. That was my past life. Wearing a batik shirt. Are you Baba? No, I'm not Baba. I'm a huge mix of a lot of different things. But actually, my family my father's family actually come from, I think, a minority group called the Zhuang in Guangxi. So, but that's a digression. Who cares about me? What was that question up there? Block vote, right? So the votes are counted according to polling districts. So in some places, because of the density of Singapore, right? So each polling station has its vote counted separately. At a table, right? They pour all the boxes onto that table. And then there's a tally of all the districts and they're added up to make a constituency. So the government does know how each district voted, and that could be as small as a block, right? Or a few blocks. And so they do know on that basis. But your vote is secret. Don't worry, your vote is secret. So, but they do know, they can know how something as small as a block voted if it's a very dense area. And that whole block is just in one district. And that then does help with the gerrymandering, right? And the fixing of boundaries every few years. Why do you continue doing this knowing that nothing much will change? Are you kidding? There's been so much change. Look at how empowered we are today compared to a few years ago. Yes, the PAP keeps doing stupid things and trying to oppress us, but can you imagine someone just maybe 5-10 years ago doing the show that I've been doing, the show with PJ Thum, and getting away with saying things that I've said? On episode 3, I actually stated that Lee Hsien Loong was behaving in a corrupt manner, right? He was saying that he could use state, national resources for party political purposes. And I said, that's the definition of corruption. And nothing happened to me. Because it's true. I never got puff mud. I didn't get sued, right? So the space is increasing, it's expanding, and we have to keep fighting for that space. We have to keep clawing for that space and pushing it forward. And if you look at maybe 1 year, there's nothing much changing. But if you look at the freedom that we have today compared to 10, 20, 30 years ago, we have way more freedom. Look at the young people in their late teens, early 20s, the kind of activism they're doing. Look at the kind of things that they're achieving, right? The Students for a Safer NUS and the kind of how they've managed to push the university to make things safer, right? The kind of ability that we have. Someone like Ivan Lim would just have been elected into office 20, 30 years ago, but now we have the ability to actually take down someone who is undeserving of office. So you have to keep all of that in mind. We have a lot more power than we had. And yes, at the very highest level, the PAP still are able to pass really stupid, oppressive laws, but slowly things are changing because we are able to push back. Look at POFMA and how the PAP has, in many ways, lost control of the narrative of POFMA. People know that it's a stupid law meant to censor us and make us fearful, right? And K. Shanmugam keeps having to come out and defend it because there has been so much more space for people like Terry and myself to actually come out and speak out and keep fighting against it using tools like the internet. So things are changing, right? And ultimately, if you're looking for massive, massive overall structural change, that will take a long time. But in order to achieve that, we need to keep pushing every day for these every little cm, every little inch, so that one day it adds up to the big change that we want, that will help us win our freedom. Gotta have hope.
With Heng Swee Keat at East Coast GRC, is it game over for Workers' Party?
With Heng Swee Keat at East Coast GRC, looks like game over for Workers' Party. Well, I am hesitant to make any predictions because ultimately the PAP has massive, massive structural advantages. But I would say that putting someone like, a very heavyweight minister, Deputy Prime Minister Heng Swee Keat at East Coast, and given the kind of structural advantages that the PAP has, they definitely have the advantage. Let's be honest, the PAP starts with a massive advantage in every constituency. Even Aljunied, even Hougang, right? If they didn't have those massive advantages, just through incumbency, but also through greater funding, their connection with all the apparatus of government, the unfair media laws, the unfair rules. So the fact that the opposition, the Workers' Party, can win Aljunied and Hougang is already a sign of of how popular they are there. Right? The fear alone gives the PAP a massive advantage in every constituency. So you mustn't think of it as a fair fight. And I would say that it is going to be very hard for any non-PAP party to win in this election. And also the problem is we don't know. Polls are illegal. Remember, opinion polls. Opinion polls, exit polls, publishing the results of opinion polls and exit polls during this period is illegal. And even trying to do opinion polls and exit and normal, voter intention polls outside of this period is very hard because technically it breaks the Public Order Act, right? And you need a lot of money and all that. But technically, the Public Order Act makes doing opinion polling illegal at any time, right? Unless you have a permit. Will the police give you a permit? Probably not, right? I think Terry tried to do an opinion poll and the police told him it was illegal. I mean, so we don't know anything. And the PAP could have a clean sweep of all the seats. I would not be surprised. Opposition could win the 1/3 of seats. I would not be surprised. But given how unfair the election is, it is much more likely the PAP will win all the seats than the opposition will make any sort of breakthrough. Okay.
Have you ever thought of running for election?
Why does everyone keep asking me that? Have you thought about running for election? So let me, since nomination day is over, let me say it's obvious I'm not running in this election, right? But if you think about it, the whole point of weighing down MPs with town councils and making them town councillors is to make life harder for them to deal with national issues and to force them into channels in which they have to act and behave and even think in a certain way. Being an MP actually narrows your political options in some ways, even as it gives you a greater platform and more resources. So I am not running for office because I want to have greater influence on Singapore's national politics than is permitted to an MP. And this is something that is really important to understand, that because of the way the system works, being an MP actually does constrain you a lot. So as things stand right now, I I would say it's not an exaggeration that Terry here and I have a greater influence on national politics than a lot of PAP backbenchers, right? And if we want to continue to have that influence and work for positive change, we're actually better off here than being an MP. We can do more good here than being an MP. Now, maybe that will change down the road. My question is always, where can I do the most good and how? And if that changes down the road, then I will reconsider. But right now, Terry and I, we can do more good for Singapore doing what we do now than being an MP. Okay. Why do you think Singapore's incumbent government does not dig in our past beyond the founding of Singapura, a state without state archaeology? So I guess it's a question about the framing of history, I guess. And I've talked about this where you have to understand the sort of incentives that the People's Action Party had and the kind of message they were trying to project. So in the 50s, there was a huge emphasis on our Malayan history, right? Singapore was a Malay island and we were part of Malaya. Geographically, we're part of Malaya. And so our history books focused very much on that. And then after we became independent, the government had to then create a new identity separate from Malaya, so their focus was on Singapore has no history. Because at that point, any reading of our history that was accurate would show that we are a Malay island and part of Malaya, part of the Malay world. So what Rajaratnam said was things like, Singapore has no history, history starts now, 1965. But then you hit the 80s, and the PAP actually starts losing seats. 81, 84, JBJ, Cham Si Tong. People are angry at the PAP for its policy failures in the late 70s, early 80s. There's massive recessions, right? There's all these crazy policies, eugenics, the end of vernacular education, the whole, second industrial revolution. So the PAP needs to come up with, or wants to come up with, a whole new version of history that helps prop up its rule, its ideology. And so it needs a new reading of history that supports that. And it then embraces this idea that Singapore was really founded by Sir Stamford Raffles and a continuity from the British period to the PAP period of Singapore being an exception to the rest of Southeast Asia, of development, of progress, of, from being from nothing, tabula rasa, to this modern nation city-state. And it actually puts out the very first textbook, history textbook in '84 has Sir Stamford Raffles on the cover. And they talk about celebrating 25 years of Singapore's independence, right? But if you look at the numbers, 25 in '84 gets you to 59. So it shows you they have a very different framing. And then in the 90s, again, because of a lot of issues, because we lost, the PAP lost 4 seats in '91. There's, a transition on from Lee Kuan Yew onwards. They then reframe Singapore history again to focus a lot more on the personal narrative of Lee Kuan Yew himself and the PAP, the creation of the Singapore story. So, long story short, the kind of history, the kind of historical framing that we have is one very much driven by political goals. The idea, for example, I think the best example of this is the Racial Harmony Day, right? Racial Harmony Day is celebrated on the day of the race riots in 1964. But Racial Harmony Day was not created until 1997. Why? Because the PAP's own position on the race riots from '64 was that they were not race riots, they were caused by agents provocateur from KL, and they were political riots. But by the 90s, the fear of Malaysia had, that issue of Malaysia hanging over us, the separation had ended, and instead the PAP had other priorities, so they moved on. And instead, they now needed something to really justify a lot of their very draconian policies towards race and religion. And so they created Racial Harmony Day on the day of those riots and changed the official historical narrative. They revised it, right, revisionist history, from one that it was agents provocateur, political riots, to race riots. And that's why Racial Harmony Day was created in '97. You see, so you see again how our history is reframed according to the needs of the government of the day, and very much to further those aims. So, sorry, this is being a long answer, but fundamentally, you know, history is written by the winners, and the winners will write history to suit themselves. And the reason why Raffles is framed is because the Singapore government, the PAP government, wants to get away from the fact that we are a Malay island in the Malay world and connect us with a different kind of history that then helps justify their policies. That's the short version. Okay, what's the next question?
For those people who are overseas?
For people who are overseas, who cannot fly back to vote because the airports are locked down, do you think it's fair that we have to pay a fine for restoring our name back? Okay, yeah, no, this is, again, right, why are we holding this election right now? Because of COVID-19, in the middle of pandemic. We don't need to call the election till January, we don't need to hold the election till April, right? So why do we even need to hold the election now? And a lot of people are getting disenfranchised because of it. Now, my understanding is that if you can show that there is a COVID-19 related reason for being struck off the voter roll, they'll restore you free of charge. I'm not sure if that includes, for example, being locked down out of Singapore. That is, I'm not sure. But this whole election is simply ill-conceived. It's a bad time to hold an election. And some people are going to get sick because of, you know, polling day. And yeah, I totally disagree with it. And I think it's very unfair to people who are abroad. In general, the system is also very unfair to people who are abroad because we don't have postal votes. We don't have ways for people who are Singaporeans, who are citizens, who've lived here all their lives, or maybe are working abroad, who pay taxes. They should have the right to vote, but the lack of postal voting or any sort of early voting or any sort of other system makes it very hard for a lot of people to vote. I think we have several hundred thousand, is it 300,000 overseas voters? There are 250, 200 over 1,000 overseas voters.
But only 3,000 registered.
But only 3,000 registered, right? And it should be pretty straightforward. If you are a citizen, you should get to vote. But why is it we only have 3,000 registered voters abroad, but 200 over 1,000 Singaporeans abroad who get disenfranchised because there are only, 10 polling stations located in consulates? It's not fair. We are a very technologically advanced country. We should have either some form of postal voting or early voting or a combination, right? Countries all over the world have postal voting and there's no problem with fraud. You know, and early voting. Korea has early voting. That's how they spread out the risk for the pandemic, for example. The Philippines, right, which is, let's face it, not as compact and technologically advanced as us and has 100 million people, can have postal voting and do it fine. Why can't we do it, right? The US has postal voting, most states do. So it makes no sense. And part of that is also this broader issue that voting is not a right in our constitution. And that makes it a bit tricky, right? Because if it is a right, then you can assert that my rights are being taken away. But the Constitution does not explicitly say that voting is a right. The Constitution merely says that the government has to be democratically elected, and the only way that we can conceive of that is to have an election. But, and then so that implies that you must then have a vote. But of course, Lee Kuan Yew has flirted in the past with giving like older people 2 votes, or saying you can only vote if you have kids, or you should have multiple kids, one for you, one for your, multiple votes, one for you, one for your kids. And that would still be democratic, right? So we need to enshrine many more of these in the Constitution. But of course, we can only do that if we have more legitimate representation in Parliament. So again, vote wisely. Okay, so what? If Chan Chun Sing and Heng Swee Keat get voted out, will Tharman become PM? Hola. I think the PAP have already made their position clear. If you want change, it's not going to be through them. They have a certain position about how the Prime Minister must be Chinese, speak Chinese, all this coded racist language. It's nonsense. But I have a good alternative for you. If you want a globally respected Singaporean Indian man in Parliament who can speak Chinese, there is one running. His name is Paul Tambia. He's running in Bukit Panjang. And he's he's the incoming head of the International Infectious Diseases Organization, globally respected man. His Chinese grades in school were better than mine. Admittedly, mine sucked, but he can speak Chinese, he can speak English, and so if you want, if you want real change and maybe see an internationally respected Indian become a Prime Minister, well, there you have it. We have another one running. Okay, what's the next one? Why do you think Singaporeans continue voting in the ruling party despite the glaring issues laid out at every election? Well, it's pretty straightforward. The elections aren't free and aren't fair, right? If you look at New Narrative, we have exhaustively detailed all the ways in which the elections are not free and not fair. And this makes it very hard for Singaporeans to choose any other party because there's fear, right? There's a restriction of your choice. There's unfair media. The election period is incredibly short, right? So you have no idea about the opposition. And then the party openly threatens to punish you and has punished voters in Aljunied for what happens after the election. Right? Look at Aljunied and the amount of upgrading funds they have. You all saw that chart on Yahoo where all the other town councils got massive amounts of upgrading funds, and then there's a tiny little thing for Aljunied, Hougang Aljunied Town Council. Voters will get punished. So between all of those things, right, the election is extremely unfair. And if you're too busy to read, watch my videos. The show of PJ Thum, episode 2, episode 3. And ultimately, remember this, right? When a voter walks into the booth, there are only 2 or 3 options in front of them. Either the PAP or an opposition party. And what if that opposition party is someone, or a group of people that you don't agree with or don't like? Then the PAP is a legitimate choice. You see, and this is part of the problem with the system as a whole because of first past the post, winner take all. It's a system that is not representative of voter desire. It's a system designed to produce very clear-cut choices and works best only if there are 2 big national parties that run in every seat. It's very unfair to small parties, regional parties. It's very unfair to any party which cannot muster resources to cover a whole country. It's based on the Westminster system, which has 2 dominant parties, but it's very unfair to that small system. So another thing we have to ask is, is this really the best electoral system for us? Even if it was totally free and fair, there are other countries which do things like proportional representation, reserved lists, a mixture of direct representation, proportional representation. There's so many options out there. Why are we sticking to a system which is unrepresentative? And even though 30-40% of Singaporeans don't vote for the PAP have never had less than 93% of the seats over the past 30, 40, 50, 60 years, right? So this is, there's a lot of structural issues, but fundamentally just remember this. People vote for the PAP because the election is unfree and unfair, and they don't have a real choice very often. Yeah. Seeing as online media may have a demographic skew, what can non-SPH MediaCorp news platforms do to reach out to primarily print and radio news consumers? Well, the law makes that very hard, right? What New Narrative is doing is we published a book, The Singaporean Citizens Agenda, which has articles that we commissioned about Singapore to try and help people think about important issues and understand important issues. But that won't help them with understanding the candidates. And this, again, is why this whole system is unfair, because of a monopoly on print and broadcast media by law, right? the 1974 Newspapers and Printing Presses Act means that there is a monopoly on broadcast and print media, basically, right? Only government-approved people can own shares and all that. And there have been attempts to set up new newspapers and broadcasting companies, but in the end, the censorship, the control system makes it very difficult. So what can they do to reach out? Not a lot, and this is why the whole system is very unfair. Buy our book, I guess. But, you know, I guess ultimately there is very little we can do, and this is why it's unfair. Yeah.
Then we can end with this.
Why don't we have televised debates like in the US? Well, basically, why would the PAP agree to televised debates? It would put them on the same level as the other parties, and they would then have to defend their policies and actually have to engage in intelligent debate, right? There is no incentive for the PAP to do anything that makes things more fair. They want to win the election. The only thing that they will guarantee is that your vote is secret and you get an actual, you know, no one's going to point a gun in your head when you go in the ballot box. Everything before that, they have tilted the playing field way in their favor and made things incredibly unfair and unfree. So there's no incentive. So you look at how elections are run in other countries where people have a more genuine choice, and you ask, why don't we have that here? Well, there's your answer, because that gives you more of a choice. The more informed you are, the more you know about issues, the more you know about candidates, right? The better it is for you, but the worse it is for the PAP, so they're not going to agree to any of that. So you want to stop now? Yeah, okay. So thank you very much, everyone. I'm told we're out of time. Thank you very much for all your questions. I'll try to do this several more times during the next 9 days. So the Online Citizen will be live streaming throughout the next 9 days. We'll have interviews, hopefully, with various candidates. We've invited people to come interview. We'll have interviews with experts. We'll be rerunning clips of Parliament to remind you of all the wonderful things that the previous Parliament has done, and remind you that it's important to look at the track record, right? Not just the manifesto and promises. And we'll hopefully have a lot more talk shows, and we're going to do our best to bring you some good coverage of this election. But ultimately, please do donate to Terry, to Online Citizen Asia. Please do subscribe or donate to New Narrative, newnaratif.com. And if you have some free time, do reach out to Terry and volunteer, because he is desperately short of volunteers. Right? It's basically just him and then just one guy in front of the camera, and that's it. That's your entire independent media. So this is how unfair things are. So thank you very much.